Hello again. I'm Jen Brazelli, joined with.
Hey, I'm Kyle Godby. This is our field notes from the swamp, and today we have Sandra Martinez with us. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you.
I'll hand it to you to give a whatever kind of introduction you'd like to give us.
I hadn't thought about that. I guess I should say I'm speaking from the desert, Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is my hometown, but I lived and worked for 25 years outside of Albuquerque on the East Coast in Philadelphia, DC, and I did work in Latin America. And so I base my consultancy from Albuquerque now, and all of my clients are out of Albuquerque or out of New Mexico. So I come from an academic background, and I taught at the Wharton School, I taught at the U.S. Army War College. But for more than 20 years, I've worked as an executive, well, first as a consultant and later as an executive coach, and I continue both modalities now. And when you asked me to do this interview, I began to think of how long I've really been engaged with complexity ideas and really been convinced that it's the best knowledge we have about understanding and intervening in systems and social systems. And for more than 20 years, in fact, that's why I was hired at the Army War College in 2007, was my background in complex adaptive systems and adult development, both of them. But what was I going to say? I've used it implicitly in my work, and we've talked about that. Kyle and Jen, we've known each other more than 2 years, right? I mean, was that workshop in 2023 in Adams Morgan, outside of DC?
Yeah. Yep, I think so.
So we've continued that dialogue. So I appreciate your interest today, and I consider this a dialogue, a freewheeling dialogue. We don't have anything planned necessarily.
That's how we like it.
Yeah, these are our notes. From the field, from the swamp, and we just spin yarn, see what comes up. I think Jen, let me hand it to you because I've been doing a bit of talking. What jumped out at you?
I mean, I think it won't surprise certain folks that I'm dying to dig into at least somewhat the adult development part of your practice, Sandra, because anybody who has probably interacted with any of us or in lots of parts of the complexity intellectual community, there's a lot to be said about the role of understanding individual or group growth and dynamics and such in a way that there's just so much to talk about. And I will just say, like, briefly, if folks have like literally no exposure to, I mean, Sandra, you can say as much or as little as you want when I hand it to you. What do we even mean by adult, stage development theories? But for anyone who's not aware, there is a lot of tension around this because there are also a lot of folks who immediately have a hard time or a problem with development theories because of the implication of there being a linear or otherwise universal or hierarchical kind of process by which a human grows and becomes better than they used to be, which is in some ways antithetical to the notions of what complex systems do and how they behave and such. So I will tease it that way. But Sandra, I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit about how it shows up for you in the work and how you reconcile it with aspects of complexity that might otherwise suggest the two can't be integrated.
So I think you did a really great job, Jen, of describing the tension, right? And I understand the origins of some of that tension because I think in the history of adult development, it has been prescriptive. Mm-hmm. It has been presented as universal. Mm-hmm. It has been presented as teleological. In other words, we look at a person and we want them, there's this progressive path where they can get better or at a higher stage, as context-free, mm-hmm. as reductionist, which those are all antithetical to the way we think about systems. But I do think a system is an individual, or an individual is a system as well, right? Mm-hmm. And there's so many ways to approach this. One is, and I'm going to set it aside for now, and then I'm going to take another approach. But one is that which I'd never heard before I heard Alicia Guerrero speak, the philosopher of science, Mariology, that challenge we have of looking at parts and whole. And, your invitation to me caused me to look back in my notes and think about all the work that I've done. And I found that in 2004, Max Boissant and I made I was interested in leadership culture, not looking at leadership as an individual, but leadership culture. And I asked him to participate. And I can't even remember if it was accepted or not, but we made an application to the Academy of Management to talk about leadership culture and look at this, the parts and the whole and the parts, which I didn't know that word before, but that's been an occupation of mine or a concern of mine from the beginning of my professional career, which frankly, in full disclosure, wasn't getting a PhD, but was owning an art gallery in Santa Fe. But we can address those things later. First of all, I thought about this as I thought about this interview, and I think there's a way to bring coherence between adult stage development, that knowledge, and we might want to move away from the word stage, right? And when I thought about that, I think, because when I work with clients, I talk about expanding their strategies, expanding their perspective taking. And I think if you look at expansion and also call it repertoire, I think we can look at, instead of stages, at an individual and say, what is your repertoire? I wouldn't use that word with them, but that's what I'm thinking. Repertoire of meaning making, or patterns of meaning making or perspective taking. And also, I think there's variability in how broad that repertoire is for individuals. It has something to do with their self-awareness, because if they don't become self-aware, how can they expand it, right? And how is it different? Because when we work with organizations, for example, with Assessment Maker, we're trying to increase the awareness at a collective level. So why wouldn't that be equally valid for looking at an individual and helping them become more aware of what their patterned reactions or responses are? I don't know if that's a helpful beginning, but that's one way I've thought about it. And then when you can look at, if you want to call it leadership behavior within culture, and we can talk about the word culture because culture is an emergent property when we look at complex systems. It's really, you might call it a constraint regime, and we can talk about constraints later. But if you look at leadership culture, it can be, it's in the language of complexity, it's the strange attractor, which is that it's the emergent patterns of meaning making that leaders are gravitated to because of that constraint regime, which could include norms, who gets rewarded, the reward system, what the narratives are, the constraints around identity at the organizational level, like we're firefighters or, we're this or that, all those things that we talk about as constraints and constructors. Let me think of some more. Who people are able to talk to, what habitual patterns are of communications. I mentioned identity before, but I think that's a big one. How people identify within the organization.
Yeah.
And I thought of an example too. There's several threads of theoretical threads, right? From Bob Keegan at Harvard to Bill Tarbett, who died recently, to Suzanne Cook-Gruder, and they use different names. But one of the challenges I run into in coaching is working with a technical, very knowledgeable person, let's say in engineering or medicine or whatever. And a lot of times, and there is a word for that in the stages, and it's named differently depending on what line of, theoretical line. Yeah. They have similarity, but for example, Bob Keegan would call it, I forgot what he calls it. Actually forgot what he called it, but it would be called skill-centric or the expert. I think he calls it the socialized mind, in his book. But it's someone that's really good at as an individual operator. They tend to really honor the knowledge that came from their discipline over other disciplines. They might have a challenge in collaboration. And remember, when we're saying this is when we're saying these repertoires are not context free, we're generally talking about Western, or let's say United States or Europe, where this might not exist. This bundle, let's say it's a bundle of co-varying patterns of behavior. It might not exist outside the cultures that we usually work in. But that person needs to change, or I'm not going to say needs to change. I'm going to say there's an invitation for that person to look at themselves differently. And a lot of times when people are resistant to change, a lot of times it's something that is attached very closely to their identity, right? And so how can they look at themselves and others differently? What are safe to fail experiments? Let's say if they get on board with that, what is the pattern? How do you respond when there's a conflict or this? Give me an example, and how might you respond differently? Where are opportunities where you might try a different type of behavior? So I think I have brought this directly up with Dave. I probably won't do it again, Dave Snowden. But I do think we have a body of knowledge here, and I think that the individual is a system, and it is the identity and patterns that person have or group of people have are constraints within the system. So we can work bottom up, we can work top down. That's my perspective in a nutshell.
That's like mic drop, just beautiful, like that entire piece, like so good, because it's so clear. It's also just sparked so many things that I want to dig into. I'm sure Kyle
I'm glad.
Equivalent list. But the one thing I actually want to just right now, when you started to, at one point, you started to say when someone needs to change or whatever, and you corrected yourself to say, but no, that's not it. I find that so interesting, because that right in and of itself, that moment, I think is a really good example of how so much about the notion of growth, which I'll just say as like a vague word that means lots of things, can become and is in our world, in our systems, and in our interactions, in our work in the West or in the States or whatever, but whatever the context might be, it's really easy to fall into that pattern. Yeah. Even in saying it, you were like, no, wait, that's not what I mean, but that's just what comes out of my mouth, because
yes.
And I think that's actually a source of where some of the problem that some folks have with adult development theories, I'm always like, this is a straw man. You guys you're responding to what is not necessarily the core or the intention of this. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge what they are against is real. And there are people out there who do use these theories in exactly the ways we've talked about, being linear and hierarchical. And, honestly, at this point, when Nora Bateson or Dave Snowden say that it borders on eugenics, I have started to see that as well. I see it. Yeah. I agree. So there's definitely this notion of, you will be better if you do these things. If you aren't this thing and you aren't good enough, you're a lesser human. So doing away with that is really hard. It's not as simple as it just said, even it just comes out of our mouths. So I just wanted to call on that. But then I also really liked when you flipped and said, it's an invitation to notice, either notice in perspective taking sense, or to just become aware of some of the things that are right now functioning as perhaps constraints, that just by virtue of being aware of them can change or modulate those constraints, and thus open up new possibilities for you as an individual system that is the emergent outcome of everything you're interacting with. So this is my way of just saying, I think that right there is so, so key. And there've been conversations lately I've had with a few folks, one of whom we should get on here in one of these, in an upcoming session, about identity, because so much of it feels like less about, if you just keep growing or if you just keep working, you too can get to stage 5 consciousness. I'm at stage 7, but I know you can get there if you try. It's so much more about, how can we help each other notice things or see things by virtue of helping almost like bouncing light around like a mirror, see things you can't see yourself, but through some sort of reflection or echolocation, and in noticing, make things possible for yourself that weren't before. So I'm curious how you feel or how you react to that, Sandra, because it's part of what
first of all, that was a great catch. A great catch. And it illustrates two things. One is how difficult change is, especially in a profession like coaching, right? Because I think coaching, its origins is attached to this, I don't want to call it modern or postmodern or teleological is a big word, but this sense that I know what's good for you.
Yeah, that guru. Right? Yeah.
I know what's good for you, and I don't think I as a coach can make that judgment. And when we go into organizations as consultants using SenseMaker or affordance mapping, or can we go in, because we have to leave that decision up to the person in the group. I know that's one of the reasons Dave really adamantly rejects adult stage development, and I agree with him there. Yeah. And I can point back, it's not so prevalent now, but a decade ago, I remember people saying, "Oh, I'm an alchemist, right? I'm an alchemist," identifying, and I'm thinking, if you're really an alchemist, you wouldn't be saying that. But sort of placing themselves like we do in tribes. I mean, it's tribal. We place ourselves based on certain qualities, and that's another thing we don't want to do is look at traits. We want to look at behavior and meaning making, but place ourselves in a higher position than others. I think that's a really good call, and I agree with it.
I want to give Kyle a chance too. I can tell you've got something too going, but I just feel, do you feel, Sandra, sometimes like it almost just needs a rebrand, in much the way that I often say like the word learning needs to be rebranded?
Yeah.
Because like when you think about development and growth and change, it's like hard to say it and then not have to immediately caveat with it. Well, I don't mean stage theory. I don't mean in a sense that we're trying to get from here to there, that I'm going to dictate the path for you. And it's so hard to talk about it without like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, because there is something really interesting about various, again, ways of prompting or reflecting or helping people and helping ourselves notice. And I don't know. Part of me is like, at this point, everything I want is to like, just throw out the old and bring in a new version that's the same, or like rebrand this thing so that it doesn't mean I'm just here to help you work on your inner development goals and the rest of the world.
That's the other thing. A lot of, please forgive me, any coach that listens to this and feels differently, but a lot of coaching is saying, we're going to go from your inner and, your inner reality outwards. And I'm thinking, wait, you need to go from the outer inner. I mean, it has to be all of one. And so then if we start doing that, we misplace, we make incorrect attributions about why things happen. We say which in the U.S. is rampant. The leader was responsible for this, or the leader did this, or and we justified all sorts of different pay rates and all sorts of things. One word I thought maybe we could add to that list is I think we need to move away from the word transformation too. I've been thinking about that.
I like
maybe that. Emergence or evolvability.
I'm on board.
Okay.
I'm on board. Although I did like you said earlier, what did you say? A bundle of like interrelated patterns.
Do you like that word bundle?
We're gonna find that. I love
it. A bundle of co-varying behaviors, patterns of meaning making. So I think like taking the knowledge that's been developed in that area, right?
Yeah.
That's the co-varying behaviors that have been observed, and put it in a language that's coherent with which I think is the best way to understand systems, including individual systems, organizational systems, and how they relate, and through constraints. But we need to give Kyle an opportunity to speak.
I'm struggling to not be an audience member right now and just take furious notes, because I'm loving the conversation between the two of you. So I really liked what you were saying about throwing out the word stage. I'm one of those highly sensitive people to the idea of hierarchies and linear progression
No, really,
at an
Kyle?
individual. Yeah, and I every once in a while I have to back off and go, oh, all right, you got me. But more my default position is working in organizations where expertise looks more like sunk cost than true benefits. It's the inability to adapt. And what I'm hearing you talk about is this ability to develop, is the ability to adapt and to be able to work with the co-regulation of that identity of an expert and find new place. Am I getting that right? Because
Yeah.
I want to get soft on this a little bit.
No, the only thing I would add, Kyle, is expertise is very important. We have to do this while honoring that we need expertise in medicine, in engineering, in our own world of complexity. We don't want to devalue the expertise, but we want the expert or the group of experts to honor knowledge from other areas to bring together, to create interactions. And I think it's more than interactions. We create a climate so collective intelligence can be developed to meet desirable goals. There was another word you used, Jen, that I liked. I think this idea of developing knowledge together, like, the ecosystems, or, and realizing that knowledge isn't possessed by one person, really. It's collectively held.
Which goes back to your point about leadership, and leadership being something that is distributed and collectively sort of arranged. It isn't in just one person, and same with most of these things. And I really like, you said earlier too about, you were using language around expanding, having a breadth or a portfolio of things. I think so much
a repertoire.
Repertoire. And like having this, almost, you're building capacity. Whether or not someone knows any of these, like the development sort of frameworks that are out there, whether or not you like them, take, for example, is it Keegan's that's got a couple that's like the socialized, then the self-authoring, then the like transcending, I think, maybe just
transforming.
Transforming, something like that. Just take those three, just even by how they're named, you could almost kind of see there's an implied, well, it's fine to be socialized, but it's even better if you can self-author who you are. And then it's even better to be transcendent, or whatever the language is. And so it's whether or not you like or don't like the framework and the choice of language for those. I think as humans, we all have the experience of knowing that in some contexts, I feel like I have access to more ways of engaging, and in some I don't. And there's that age-old joke about you can be as well adjusted as anybody, but go back home for the holidays to be with your family at Thanksgiving. And then are you a self-authoring mind then? So have you regressed? And I just think that those examples, they get tossed about with a bit of flippant, like, haha, but they're really good and close at hand examples of why this notion of the staged development process doesn't hold, but that we can still find something meaningful in the notion of capacity. I have the capacity to be self-transcendent or whatever this other phase might be, but not in all contexts at all times. And so what does it mean to be currently enacting or engaging in a certain way versus have the capacity for it? I just find that to be so interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I think individually, there's some difference in when we can access, the context in which we can access. And then also there's the capacity that different individuals have. Right. Their range of what they can access is different. So it's not context free, it's not context free.
Right.
And also what, let's say we use that co-varying bundles of activity. It's not always the more complex type of language and behavior that works in every situation, right? Sometimes the situation calls for a lot of clarity and discipline and more straightaway direction. Or you could look at the Cynefin map or the Cynefin framework itself and say, yeah, sometimes it's complex and sometimes it's more simple.
Yeah.
So
I'm flippant with how I talk about expertise. So I don't want my surgeon to have taken a 24-hour workshop and then gotten their
Boot camp
certification. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to drive across the bridge built by the garage band that's just happened to do the heavy lifting. Absolutely right. Like, we need that. But I spent a lot of time on things like cloud transformation, where the old mainframe guys just were immovable on.
right. It's a good example.
This is not going to
it?
be a thing. It's a fad. I'm going to stand my ground, and then you'll come back for me. And now they're all retired, and we don't hear from them anymore because they stood their ground and they missed the boats. I wonder if there's another. We want to throw out transformation. I'm good with that. Love throwing out the idea of stage. I wonder if there's another way of sort of bisecting the idea of expertise here, because I've heard expertise talk about the ability to move through contexts with knowledge, rather than that knowledge being a rigid structure that is immovable. But they don't. Maybe it's the English language that's just really weak in this space, like so many others. I love my kids and I love pizza. We don't have a better word to break that down. But I wonder if you have another way of thinking about expertise that is available to identify those as possibly two different things. Either of you, really. This is me trying to again, soften the approach.
Here's what I'll say. I mean, I am, Sandra, curious if you have thoughts on this, and maybe even, I don't know, tell me you think I'm crazy. But I think your description of expertise, in a way, my reaction to it is like the second one, the version of expertise that becomes rigid and becomes a blocker or creates blind spots. I almost want to be like, that's not expertise, but I got to dial that back immediately and go, well, maybe that is how a lot of people think of the word expertise. I think of expertise as the first thing you mentioned. It is the collection of, yes, information and knowledge as like objects, but also stored memory and potential and capacity and expertise that might emerge through me, but that is actually the synthesis of everything I find myself in interaction with here today that's different than me in another context. But in all of those cases, in the way that I see expertise, it again is that it's that potential and it's the experience that I have built that can inform whatever I am going to do next. And I think of it as fluid in that way. I recognize not everyone thinks about things the way that the three of us are on about here. So like, I know that, but I wonder if there just simply is a different word for the notion of when expertise becomes crystallized. There's probably a word for it that I'm just not thinking of because I feel like there's some poetic.
Yeah. Well, let me add another piece to that just might add a little bit of from a different angle, redefine that. So when I talk to senior leaders about when they want experts, they need to bring experts in to replace some of the research that we're going to do, or they need experts to evaluate something or be part of a project. It's often I want to be able to delegate this responsibility and sleep at night. Realistically, I want to name somebody is really it. And so the idea of stasis when I'm doing any kind of change-oriented project, which is pretty much all of them, that maintaining of stasis to continue to have that identity as the person that will allow you to sleep at night because I've got this is it's one and the same. And so when I talk about expertise, I think I'm talking about in a large organization, kind of the organizations I've been in anyway, and finance and healthcare, retail, tech, that kind of stuff. But it's not universal outside that.
I pose this, and I won't say anymore. Is this the difference between the notion of expertise versus the expert? And what an expert is asked. Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, well, I think there's so many things at play here. One is a CYA move.
Yeah.
Right? And we know from working in complexity that you bring in experts when it's a not a complex issue, when there is an answer that can be found and followed. But also, I'm thinking of an operating room, for example, and there's a physician that's very highly qualified, but his nurse says something, right? Does he listen to her?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of time our knowledge is embodied, right? The instrument you pick up, your heuristics about what to do next. So, part of that, and this refers to those co-varying behaviors that I'm talking about. Part of that is coming to the challenge at hand with your embodied knowledge, but also having that capacity to honor when somebody has a notion for you or a comment, so then you can integrate that into your decision making and not say, I know, right? I'm not going to listen. So that's one element of this. It's how that person enters into that space to actually intervene or get their work done. How open are they to things that should be interrupting how they usually do things and integrate it into their framework? That's one thing. And then there's all sorts of organizational pressures and ways expertise is used.
Yeah, misused too.
Yeah, or sometimes people call in large, expensive consultants because if it fails, they can say, well, I called in so and so, right? How they're wrong.
Yep.
As you were talking, I did think of a leader that I work with. I think individual leaders they make a huge difference. This particular leader left a high performing, I'm not even going to say what industry it is, and I was going to say gender, but her presence, the fact that she's not there anymore is already impacting how people are interacting. The way she was able to, I don't want to say enforce, the way she was able to hold people accountable without being that kinetic force, right? She was able to hold people accountable, create a sense of mission, create a sense of urgency. And that's not there anymore. And also, this particular leader did shift the leadership culture in this particular institution from something that was more top-down, more directive, to something that was more inclusive, more open, less dependent on ego in the sense of I'm important, you're not. I just want to say those two things.
But I think you nailed, especially, it's funny that you mentioned the first one made me think, when I was going to say to you, Kyle, too, afterwards, was I sometimes think, when people joke, like, you don't hate Mondays, you hate capitalism, right? Like, you don't hate expertise. You hate when expertise is misused or weaponized in those organizational settings,
All fair.
And I actually, and this isn't really like at you, Kyle, but I actually think this is an interesting thing, because that dynamic for many concepts, for adult development theory, for things we've talked about in separate conversations, I feel like it's true for so many of them. It's like how much of what we find ourselves doing in our practices, the three of us as individuals, what we find ourselves doing in our practices is the equivalent of like helping people see you don't hate X, you hate Y. And it's like undoing a straw man version of something, or undoing an overly reductionistic understanding of something, or better yet, not just unlearning, but like filling in with a richer picture, richer, resolution. If you don't hate X, or you don't think about X, you think Y. Like, it just never occurred to me, like, that's half the practice. So I don't know if either of you.
No, I like that. It's like loosening the relationship. Like, you just default to a particular relationship and seeing and making it, discerning how it doesn't have to be tightly coupled like that.
Yeah. Ooh, tightly coupled's a good phrase, Sandra. It's funny. We were chatting about this in one of our recent Friday conversations, myself and a few others, and it was actually related to the identity thing. And I had gotten on this tangent with a metaphor that I think just it killed the energy of the chat, so we moved on. But I'll bring it up here. But the metaphor was that notion of identity and how the things that kind of define you are almost like these couplings that can be really, really tight and rigid, or can be loosey-goosey. And I literally was talking about like a water molecule. I was like, or any kind of molecule from a chemistry perspective, you're made up of multiple things. Hydrogen atoms, oxygen atoms, whatever. We won't go too deep down this road, but the notion that there are different types of bonds, you've got ionic bonds, you've got covalent bonds, whatever. And so much of the work, this was in a conversation about coaching, which I am not a coach, but this is why I find this such an intriguing thing, that it feels to me like a lot of coaching, if it's in a complexity science informed way, meaning is really about helping others, and maybe self too, understand those couplings, free them a little bit, make them less tight or in place, basically just first awareness, but then second, are there places where you can make them looser, or even remove the couplings and increase the degrees of freedom, which is a big phrase I'm a big fan of. And then that was, everyone was like, Jen, it's Friday, we don't want to hear about chemistry. But Sandra, I mean, I'm curious how that hits.
No, I think that's right on. I think I can think of an example like that. I mean, there's been this talk of amygdala, triggered emotions and all that, which is not a really informed view of where emotions come from. Mm-hmm. And I think I read Lisa Feldman Barrett, How Emotions Are Made. And, our brain is a predicting mechanism, right? So our brain sees something and it calls on our memory, and it wants to prepare us for what's about to happen. So it impacts, our neurological, biological, syntactic system, and we get these physical sensations. And then we actually construct the emotion. We name it. I'm angry, that triggered me or whatever. And, with several clients, what I've used, respectful of their feelings about that emotion, try to expand their understanding. Like, they really are giving a name, that sensation, you've given meaning because of your past experience. You can name that sensation something different. And that might open up, maybe the naming is a constraint, right? But if you name it something different, maybe it can be an enabling constraint for you to manage for you to have more, be able to manage better that situation, give yourself more options. But that's a really tightly coupled, I have the sensation, it's anger. I have the sensation, it's anxiety. That's a real example of where a coach could work and separate those two things.
I love hearing you say this, because I haven't done a lot of work like with emotions. I find, and have at times read deeply into the science of like socio-emotional regulation out of curiosity more than anything. A lot of it stems back from when I was actually a teacher. So, and I've just continued following that thread for curiosity's sake. But and young people in particular, and helping with that, it does a lot of good. So as an adult, why not continue the logic? But one of the things I remember encountering, and I forget which particular book or author it was, but just talking about the importance of naming your emotions and understanding that it's good, but to hear you say that even the naming of is itself can function as a constraint, maybe as a constructor, who knows, whatever, as an act in some form. And the choice not to name something or to name it differently has just literally never occurred to me. I find with myself, and this is getting probably into like, now we're going to be in therapy mode for all of us, but like I have over the years kind of arrived at a place where more often than not, I don't name what I'm feeling. There was a period in my life where I kind of worked hard to do that, because to keep it very simple, I tend to intellectualize everything. So you could say I've also intellectualized my feelings for many years of my life. But I learned many, many years ago that I was better off if I didn't intellectualize my emotions. And I actually just came to terms with letting my emotions be the emergent state of my body and just be with it. And so I did that. But, the first advice you get from anybody is sit with your feeling, name what you're feeling, know that it's weather and it will pass, all those things. I did that like a good student of emotion. I was like, I think I'm feeling tense, which is a feeling in my body. Now, what's the emotion I'm feeling? I'm scared about blah, 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 and like, eventually I did that enough. And I'm at a point where, and have been for a long time, where usually when I'm feeling intense emotion, I don't name it at all. I don't bring it into an explicit place in my brain. And I have really struggled to explain to people the few times it's ever come up how I find that really positive and empowering when people are like, well, no, you're supposed to name your emotions so that you can understand them and then regulate them or at least accept them. And I'm like, I'm doing all those things without naming them. So I don't know, Sandra. I mean, I have not also been ever engaged with like a coach per se, but if I ever were, I feel like I would have loved to have a coach even suggest to me that your relationship with your own emotional state is something that you can modulate, and not in the stoic or the must control and lock down your emotions, but more in the I'm choosing what to name or not to name and how to name it.
Yeah, I think the word that this author used was we construct our emotions.
Interesting.
I just want to know, what was your emotion that you felt yesterday on the slopes? Weren't you on the slopes yesterday? Or was that Monday?
It was exhilaration, fatigue.
Exhilaration and fatigue.
There was a lot of fresh snow and it was very bumpy and lumpy. So on a snowboard, those of you who have any knowledge, snowboarding and moguls are not always the best of friends, although some love it. Some do love it. But
I never snowboarded.
I did a few mogul runs with the snowboard and it's tiring. But yes, exhilaration was what I would never have named it until you asked me. That's the thing. It's almost like Schrodinger's emotion until you asked me to name it. Then I collapse the wave function down and say, this is what it was. So I've gotten really, a lot of things in my life, I really prefer to leave in the uncollapsed wave function state.
Well, and let me just say, as a coach, I first acknowledge the way the person is feeling, right? And the way they name it, and only decide to move into this intervention if there's a space for that. I mean, that's always really important.
Yeah, of course.
But, excuse me, I'm still getting over this 20-day cold. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess when I thought about talking to you, one thing that came to mind is, I had, when I owned a gallery in Santa Fe, which was quite a few decades ago, and Santa Fe was a different place where different groups of people interacted more freely. And of course, I was a gallery owner, co-owner with my former husband. I think I've told you this before, is I got to know some of the founders of the Santa Fe Institute, specifically David Pines and Murray Gelman. And David Pines and his wife, Susie Pines, they're both dead now, all of them. They used to have us over with Murray Gelman, who was my dinner partner on several occasions. Now, this is when I, represented Mexican artists and artists in the Southwest that were doing contemporary work. And they actually, I actually had the audacity to ask them questions which they answered, right? And only later, when I pursued the PhD, and then I started working in organizations, did I think back, oh my, I'm looking at a complexity that I can't explain what would be helpful. And I went back to David Pines, and he gave me, recommended a book that summarized some of the ideas. And he said, Sandra, look at emergence, look at, in social systems emergence. And then I actually pulled up this book that I don't think he gave it to me. And I read something that Murray Gelman said in 1994, and he said something is, we need to look at this in social systems. Mm-hmm. We need to look at cultures. I thought that was so interesting because some of these physicists would have rejected the application of this hard science notion in social systems.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I'm always so jealous when I hear you talk about how you were like hobnobbing with all of these folks.
Well, I mean, hobnobbing is just, I had the good fortune because of this one relationship.
Yeah.
And I only appreciated it fully later.
Yeah. Of course.
Right.
That's how it always
is.
But
if I hadn't gone, I maybe would have not followed that.
Mm-hmm.
of reasoning, or that explanatory inquiry, right?
Yeah, but isn't it funny how, maybe this is just an aside, but like the most random little things, not even random, I guess I should say, that what seemingly trivial little things have such power to redirect, the course of any kind of pursuit or life. And obviously I love that and find so much meaning in that. But I find it almost kind of, it's not even a coincidence, but when I was in high school, my senior year, we were in physics, and we had to do, was in like the second year, whatever, AP physics, one of the advanced classes. And we had to do some kind of report. And I remember doing it on quarks, because I was just so enamored, with the stuff that we didn't get to in the basic courses in high school. I was reading a lot about quantum physics, and then also I was really into subatomic particles. And I studied Murray Gell-Mann, because he was, like, he named the quark and all that. And I remember giving this presentation, and for some reason his name always stuck with me. And then, fast forward years later, and moving through all of my background that we won't belabor and bore the listeners with, because they've heard it before. But only however many years later, when I, encountered some complexity stuff and was looking into Santa Fe Institute, and I was like, wow, this place seems so cool. Like, after the fact, like, oh gosh, who are the founders? Where did this come from? And it wasn't like it had any meaningful impact on my career, because I probably would have pursued what I did anyway. But just recognizing that there was some kind of like full circle moment where I was like, wait a minute, this person, because in that report, I reported on quarks or whatever, but I also did a deep dive into a lot of the things he wrote about, and a lot of the things he was writing about weren't quarks, they were complexity, and it stuck with me as a high schooler. Yeah. And it came back again in school and in college, and then in grad school, and then later in career and stuff. So I don't know, I'd be really I'm almost dying to ask anybody who listens or watches, to like, write in, listener, and share your version of that, because I kind of feel like there's a lot of those,
I'm thinking it does illustrate something about the complex world we live in, is that all these interrelationships, these interweavings, something does emerge from them. Mm-hmm. It's unpredictable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know that I have the words to say it, but anyway.
But you're totally right about the having folks sort of prod or prompt. In this case, look at this, should be looked at in terms of social and soft sciences, and not just the hard sciences. I mean, that's such a challenge even now, but for sure, even in my time in the physics world, there was such a resistance there were almost two flavors. Kyle and I have talked about this before, but there were two flavors of physics majors. There were the physics majors who really wanted to get into like the physics, and there were the physics majors who wanted to think about physics, but in this like other kind of loosey-goosey systems kind of way. And I just feel like we've got to find more opportunities to let the folks who want to do the latter bring the rigor of the science into other spaces where generally they're afraid to mix.
Yeah. I'm going to find, actually, because I thought it was so funny. Let me find this, because he did say something like, we need to try to find those few social scientists who don't suffer from a crippling math phobia. That are nevertheless not the kinds, and I think you're sort of referring, who trivialize social problems by mathematizing them,
Yes.
And so the other thing I was thinking about was how positivism is still going really strong, and it underlies even the non-scientists that we speak to in organizations. Yeah. They're driven by SWOTs or prediction models or control or command and control. And, it's a zeitgeist, or it's a narrative. It's so underlies without our thinking and our clients' thinking how things work, and causality, right? Mm-hmm. That causality is like, and this is brought by Alicia Guerrero, her complexity. What is it? The name of the book?
The most recent one. Yeah. What is it? Context.
Oh, the first one is Context is Everything, right?
Yeah. Context changes everything, or changes. Yeah. And then.
Yeah. Context. And the second book is something about this positivism and how strong it was in the UK and the US. And so 5 women Iris Murdoch, one of them, who pushed up against it, were just dismissed. And I think this reductionist view that you can take everything apart, understand the parts, and then put it back together to explain causality is something that we're up against.
Yeah. I was just looking to find the name of that book because it's like, it was good. It's Context. Why Context
which one
matters.
is
Why Context Matters. I want everyone to go read it.
That's the second one, right?
Yes, the one, the newest one. But I mean, you know, and this is an evergreen topic, you know, for all of us, but it feels safer. I think it's an illusion, but I have to work hard in most of my practice to remember and hold a level of, you know, empathy or offer some grace to everybody I work with who continues to kind of grasp for things that are sort of positivist in their spirit, even if not in name, and wanting either proof or wanting prediction or wanting the safety and the security of some of these kind of practices. And I know they come from a place of a little bit of a fear, a little bit of like a habituated or sort of patterned, you know, need for that security, even if we can see that a lot of times that security is an illusion or a mirage. It's a pretty reasonable human organism thing to want some security, to not, you know, walk out into a field where I don't know if there are any number of predators who will eat me for lunch. So you know, there's such an interesting aspect of our practice to be able to say, you say positivism, and we all nod our head in agreement, like, down with positivism, like it's bad and it harms the way that we could be doing good in the world. And yet we have to navigate all of these organizational settings where the entire machine is built to enforce that.
And they wouldn't even use the word positivism.
No.
They're just totally, you know, that's the way we've been educated.
Business. That's how business succeeds.
Yeah.
How's it going, Kyle?
I'm just soaking all of this in. This is wonderful. I don't even want to interrupt. I'm having so many thoughts though. One of the things that really struck me doing some narrative research with senior leaders was my assumption going into that of their need to create this certainty, which created all the categorization of things like expertise that generated that sort of false identity of expertise. Maybe it created a lot of strain and was, you know, fueled by a lot of just scarcity or the impression of scarcity, at least. But how that scaled, how absolutely powerless a lot of these leaders felt, that feeling that scarcity and needing that certainty for their own survival. It was, again, eye-opening through all of those conversations. I kind of went in thinking you just need to like relax things a little bit. And their answer was sort of like, I can't relax things while the auditors are breathing down my throat, while shareholders are staring at us, while I've got the board asking for this thing. It was a different level of Zoom, but there became this sort of sense of futility. Like, all right, it's all inescapable and it far exceeds the walls of this building. But I don't know why I started going down that rabbit hole. Honestly, we were on something there.
That's a reality. I mean, if you look at that, I mean, when one thing I did is I went back and I'm reading that first book of Alicia Juarero, because her books are so dense you can't absorb it. And one thing that I hadn't captured in the first reading was I was thinking that, you know, the persistence of certain patterns, that came about because we repeat these patterns. And then I noticed that she said, no, it's persists because it becomes encoded in the patterns in different ways, right? And one of the things, and then I started looking, because, you know, I try to turn these things into diagrams or things that would be useful for clients, both consulting and organizational clients. So I'm thinking, oh, wait, if I could sort of identify where things are encoded, then people might actually be able to, and this did happen with one client where he identified that link that he could open up. But when you talk about that, one of the things that is a constraint in so many of our organizations now is the rhythm and the deadline cycle. It's like, they say it's real, but is it real, or to what degree is that constructed?
Yeah. It's an actant, whether it's a concrete, tangible thing, or whether it is something that is, to your point, just an enacted synthesis of things. You know what this is kind of making me think through too is, and again, Kyle and I will joke on here from time to time that like sometimes it's easy to get in your head that there is like kind of one main bad guy at the top of the mountain who is the reason that this company still operates the way it does and doesn't want to open up to a more systems oriented practice or be we know so much from complexity science, among other things. You said this early on, that it's some of the best knowledge we have about how to navigate and manage and intervene inside of as part of systems to achieve more desirable outcomes, right? And so if we have all of this at our disposal and you have people inside an organization or a community who are willing to like help and bring it through, why aren't we acting on this? And it's like you kind of go on this search, to your point, Kyle, about the study with leaders. You might have expected something different, and the leaders themselves are like, we're powerless against this because the system says I have to do it. And you keep climbing like in a video game to find the ultimate bad guy, like the villain at the top of the mountain who is there and he is in his throne and he was like, I am the one who is going to dictate that we continue to follow Newtonian, reductionist, mechanical ways of working, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, there ain't one guy doing that, right? The villain, which is a weird idea, is distributed. Like the villain is the complex system, or within the links and interactions within the systems that we perpetuate / intervene, etc. And to me, while this is silly as a metaphor, I actually find it also is sort of hope giving, because we know a lot about how to work and engage in complex adaptive systems. So if the problem is all around us, it's in the water, it's in the air, it's the systems that have been perpetuated, there isn't one guy we just need to convince to become more complexity conscious, but that it is around us. Well, hey man, we got the tools for that. Let's go, right? Because it is a complex system. In this case, it's a complex system that we want to disrupt or intervene or move into a future state or whatever. So I always think about that notion of there's some person, whether they're in a leadership role or otherwise, who's got the magic wand, who is insisting we continue to be positive, mechanical. And the reality is it's all around us in the interaction. So,
and I would add, we perpetuate it.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're perpetuating it in whatever.
To the extent that we either have to or have no other good choices. We all do it more and less in different places. And that's one of the things Kyle and I have talked about recently in this chat is, where, if you think about your affordance map, which aspects or actants in the system are within reach to make change on or change with or modulate or modify, and which are not. And then as that changes, you change your strategy as those things come into or out of reach. And so that's it.
I love I'm calling it affordance mapping rather than estuarine mapping, but I love it because of that. If we look at those constraints and constructors, which I'm still trying to navigate the difference between constraints and constructors. So,
yeah.
Kyle, what were you going to say?
I love the distributed villain. That is, I wrote that down. We're going to have to run with that.
Villain
We're part of the distributed villain. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So my question, as I'm listening to you talk, Jen, my question for both of you, why do we walk into organizations with our toolbox that on the top of it, our first tool we grab is the suggestion for people to slow down, to go to abstraction, to experiment, take risks, these sort of things, when we have this real awareness that those aren't necessarily available. It's our first go-to. And it's usually, I think, why at least I've been pushed out of the room. I hear a lot of other people I talk to are pushed out of the room because it's just not pragmatic. I think some of us have learned to adapt, but our first offering still, you have to slow down. We have to make sense of the system. And hearing you talk, it's like, yes, of course, obviously. But knowing that, why would we ever ask anyone that has a gun to their head to slow down for a minute?
Why do you say that? Because I don't know that. I don't think that's my first tool.
I'm not saying everyone.
No, that's
does
not
that for sure.
It's not my first tool either.
Yeah.
But I think it's something to keep in mind. Being involved in change management for a long time, we want to both look like the person and not look like. We want to look like them, affirm them, and we have to have the perspective of not being them at the same time.
Yeah.
We don't use this word anymore, but we used to use the word deviant, the importance of deviant behavior. And I used to use that word at the Army War College. It used to drive them crazy. So you're just deviating from the norm. That's deviant behavior. Positive deviance, that's the term.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, there's two things to remind ourselves, thank you, Kyle, is we need to affirm where people are. I mean, we do that in the coaching room, but I think I'm actually going to do a presentation tomorrow, and it's reminding me, affirm where they are, affirm their perspectives. And then, calibrate how you're introducing something new.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to change my presentation for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. I want to see that.
Well, and I was going to say, I know, Kyle, you mean we as in like the royal we, like the
Royal
world of people whose first instinct
not pointing
is to be like,
fingers.
slow down. So,
right.
But
we go to our workshops and we get the tool. Like, here's how you go fix a thing. Go analyze it first.
Yeah.
Do the discovery work.
Well, and it's an important thing to find opportunities where you can to get people to. I mean, it's part of it is, activating the like anomaly. Difference noticing part of the brain, right? So there's a reason that's a tool that's out there. But to your point about starting with it, yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot more like jump on a moving train. Just get your ass on the train one way or another and get your bearings on the train. And then once you can stand up on the moving train, then you engage. And it's funny, Sandra, that you use the word calibrate, because that's actually a phrase I've been using lately with some of my clients, is really having to emphasize there's a lot of actually there's a fear if I use the word pause at all. If I say, let's hold up here, let's just let's make sure we're being thoughtful. Clients will literally ask, I want you to help me be thoughtful about this so we don't run headlong into something dumb. And then, then if I were to accidentally say something, so let's just pause and get our bearings, I would immediately lose their trust because we're not allowed. So it's calibration in motion is a phrase I was using earlier this week. So, but that's what it is. And that's maybe something that, I look at someone like Sandra with decades of experience. It's easy to lose sight of how subtle but important that is, especially for folks that are newer to this kind of work or to this way of thinking. So yes, get on the moving train first.
Yeah.
Get your bearings, affirm theirs, then you can start tinkering from there.
I'm wondering if this isn't a little bit of a brand of us thinking that we know what is good for them. I mean, like it creeping in,
yes,
and without going in and saying, help me observe and really understand where you are and what, I have to stop myself and I have to remember I'm not an evangelist for this. I can't be an evangelist. There's a whole world out there that exists without this, and reminding myself of that. And although I do think it's the best way to try, I do think complexity, I really think it's the best knowledge we have. It's just how to talk about it and how to have, how to emotionally regulate as a consultant going in and really honoring where your client is and what they need and the way the language they use and how they say this.
Yeah. And another one comes to mind too, where we love to say, we're going to do this workshop, this sense-making workshop. We're going to understand things. Okay, what am I going to get out of it? Well, we don't know. Now, we're talking to somebody that's existing in this climate of scarcity that needs to think in terms of transactions, and we're being wishy-washy with this. And to your, I love the call out, Sandra. Are we walking in as the gurus saying you just have to change your mindset? You have to look at this differently, and then it'll all become clear. You have to ascend. Let me help you with that.
I mean, doesn't it feel like if you
huge risk,
you were to go to the doctor and that you've got a cough and you want, I might have bronchitis, I might have pneumonia, I don't know, but could you check out my cough? And the doctor's like, yeah, but I'm not worried about your cough. You're overweight. You need to lose some weight. I mean, and as women, we know this one well, because women get the, are you sure it's not just, your hormones, or like, you're just tired. It's all in your head, honey. But like, there's a little bit of that when you are seeking expertise and you do go into some expert interactions as the seeker of help, with an idea of what you need out of that relationship. And even if down the road it might turn out that what you're going to get is better than what you were going in asking for, it's pretty damn off-putting and disrespectful to be told in the beginning of that interaction, actually, that's not what you need. Even if it's true, that's not it. We're not there yet. You know what I mean? So there's something about the consultative relationship that really kind of has to be, earned through trust and through time and interaction, before you can get to the point where you might actually say, there might be something else I can help you with here that's better than what you're actually looking for right now. But only after you trust that I'm trying to help you on your terms and not on mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at the clock. We have 15 more minutes. I want to make sure that I don't know if you have any desires to go anywhere with this conversation, but I just want to say how much I appreciate both of you and, being on this journey together with you. I mean, one of the reasons we form sort of this dialogue sort of mode, and you guys, along with Stephen, have taken it to a much higher level with the community practice. But just the curiosity, and I think all of us are curious, and we're working on how to talk to people about this, right? How to bring them along. And I know, I mean, I've been involved with complexity for a long time. I've mostly used it implicitly, except for the past 7 years, and using these tools that are some of them quite remarkable coming out of Cynefin. It's I'm excited about it, and I'm just looking for ways. Now I used to try to work with large organizations. I'm just taking it down a notch and just doing it with a few members in the C-suite, doing it with smaller ecosystems, trying to get experience doing it.
That's an interesting dynamic, because I am in the same, I've seen, it's not like I'm observing a trend per se, but I am in the same place. Part of it's also market dynamics, but I actually am finding, and I guess this is a little bit of a different thing from the outside as a consultant or a partner rather than being on the inside, Kyle. So I'm curious too, if you have a different perspective, but lately I am finding that the opportunities to really do some meaningful things and make what we learn from complexity, like really front and center and drive the work, is happening in those smaller places, smaller groups, smaller contexts, I guess, more localized contexts, versus the larger organization type projects that I'm still part of are very much, the complexity is embedded. It's baked into the cake. It's like the file baked into the cake to free the people on the other side. It's never the explicit. And even in places where you can kind of earn the right to do a little more of it over time. Lately, it's very much a mix of the bigger projects where we just don't talk about it. We just do it without telling people that's what we're doing. But then it's smaller groups that are really an opportunity to do some of these things, use these methods in their full glory. So I don't know if that's something, like, I'm curious to hear you say that, because I'm finding the same. Is that just a function of market dynamics right now and what clients want to pay for? Is that because of the nature of that institutional distributed villain system that exists in big companies, but in small little groups we can kind of avoid? I don't know. And Kyle, I'm curious if that dynamic is at work in-house too.
I'll say internally, what I'm noticing is that people are getting creative because they know the structures are not supporting them. And I've said before, when I talk to people outside our circles about complexity, they start talking like a 5-year-old. It's all hickly-pickly and it's all jangled. And can you come help us untangle this mess that we've created? They get very frantic. They start talking with their hands a lot. They get into hyperbole a lot, and they don't have access to the language. They don't have access to the mechanisms to say, this is the person I should be talking to, and this is the conversation I can have to be able to describe this or ask for something. But I see that there's a desire for that, and people are improvising their way through that. The last couple of gigs that I've been brought into to work on anything, people have started out saying, we want somebody that understands the complexity of these systems, how entangled they are. That wasn't exactly the words they were using, but I was going in and like a project around, mergers and acquisitions, or we want to install large language models into a place that needs better data governance. It wasn't, we need a top-down reassessment of everything. And that's the right idea. But people were also recognizing, I can't ask somebody to look like at this. That's going to bring in the tools that we've had for the last 40 years that have created the mess that I'm trying to clean up right now. And that acknowledgement is, I think, a huge leap forward from where we were 5 years ago.
That's heartening.
That's big.
That's heartening.
Yeah. So what I want to develop, what my goal is to be able to come up with metaphors on the spot, like Jen, like the file baked into the cake. Like, right.
No, you don't. It's a blessing and a curse, because you find yourself in a conversation where you have spat out 6 metaphors, and the person on the other end, God bless them, they're like, I don't know which of these I should be plugging into my mental schema. So to be very real with you guys, I do think in metaphors. I have studied metaphorical thinking because I know my brain is wired this way, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we should unpack about that sometime, maybe on another chat, Kyle. But it's a double-edged sword, because of the nature of our brains being, in that analogical mode. You make a lot of leaps, which can, like in the game of Candyland or something, like it can leap you up on the journey. And here's another metaphor, but it can also be, like the thing that sends you back 6 squares because you don't know which way the leap's going, and how do you really want to leap that far? You skipped a great square you would have loved to have stopped on if you skipped too far. So yeah. Anyway,
I played Monopoly, not Candyland, but
Chutes and Ladders is what I was actually thinking of at first, because I was thinking the ups and the downs.
That too.
Yeah.
Sandra, I'm so glad you were able to join us with this, because you were saying before, you're not evangelizing this, and that's not what this is or what we're doing. I love. I think what we've all found as an attractor while we're investing in this space is that it's not us going out to the world and saying you have to change everything. These old draconian institutions, we just have to knock them over, right? And then call me when you're done. But we are spending this time investing in people that are curious about this and building this muscle. It's not evangelism you all need to adopt this, so much as there are people here. Let's, like I say all the time, let's set the table and invite people to it. And that's, you were just part of that table setting with this conversation. So thank you for putting your energy into
my
this.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
I have to add that given the state of the world right now, I have wished that, if not that somebody else could introduce this way of thinking to people that are working really hard to try to shift the needle on the trajectory that we're currently on. I'm not even talking at a national level, but at a state level or a city level. I think it would be useful there.
Yes. If it's helpful to hear something that's been keeping me afloat this week and last week, when I think about Minnesota. And Kyle and I have talked in the past briefly, maybe we should reprise this too, about philosophical anarchism. We don't have to go down that road right this second, but it's parallels with complexity-informed practices. One of the things that I am paying attention to, and I am being judicious with how much of my attention I am giving to certain information feeds right now for my own well-being, of course, but we all want to be informed. In Minnesota, while I watched everything that's unfolded there with horror and despair and just, sheer depression about all of it, I also am seeing all of the reports and sharing about the way that the community is coming together. And
Yes.
not just the radical leftists who might be like my people, but regular everyday folks who would say, I'm not political, I'm not this, I'm not that, who are engaged in a form of mutual aid and communal care and mobilizing in ways that are self-organizing and certainly path dependent. No one made up a plan beforehand. It's all emerging through and in reaction to, but at the same time in a proactive synthesis of people helping each other. Now, it would be far preferable that it is not in response to these atrocities. But it is giving me hope when I just take a moment to notice that it is there and it does happen and it can happen. And so I won't say none, a lot of the community organizing that is happening, those folks probably haven't studied, complexity science. Some of them maybe have, but a lot of them probably have never heard of any of the crap that we yarn on about here. And yet, through lived experience, through collaboration, mutual aid, community-based, the right level of granularity, they are doing it. So like in some future world, when hopefully things are better, she says vaguely, I would love to look back at an example of what's going on in Minnesota right now, or any of the other examples we could point to and say, that's also what it looks like when you act in ways that are aligned with what we know about complex human ecosystems. So I don't know if that is at all a nice thing to share as far as like, does it make for anything? But there is hope there.
It's very well stated, and I've seen multiple examples, and I salute them. Mm-hmm. And I hope in the same situation that I would have the courage to, and the commitment to do in my community what they've done for their community.
In our own small way, we're probably all going to have the opportunity to find out. So we're going to live it.
And what you were just describing is exactly how I was reading it, but how I've been looking at Ukraine as well. Mm-hmm. And I hate to call Minnesota a microcosm of it because it sounds diminishing, but it is on a very similar response in that the amount of strain created this ingenuity and adaptation that and humanity that's necessary in that space. And we're going to learn a ton from that. The same way that Ukraine itself has redefined war for the next how many decades. Minnesota, this interaction, we'll see what this informs and where it sets itself, but it is not being lost. That's for sure.
Yeah. We're paying a cost humans shouldn't have to. Good humans. So we can't ignore that fact, but there's hope for some level of future state that has some desirable outcomes down the road, So on those lovely notes, with just a couple minutes left, I want to say thank you, Sandra. This has been, I love being able to have another voice in the mix, of course, but I also appreciate especially chatting with you about the stuff we chatted about today. We could obviously go on for hours and hours. I'm curious if either of you have anything you want to say in the last couple minutes.
Go ahead, Sandra. I'm going to watch this again as an audience
member. For your friendship, collegiality, and mutual learning, and I really appreciate the way you've stated things, right? And I learn a lot from both of you, and I appreciate you appreciating me and inviting me, and we'll carry on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, same.
All right.
Love it.